Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about.
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Hi, welcome to the Curious Fox podcast for those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla, and it is Self-Love Month.
That was a champagne popping. Yay!
That was a parade.
Celebration.
I imagine, what would a self-love parade look like? Just hearts and people loving on themselves, all body shapes and sizes and colors, and everyone celebrating.
Bubble bath, foam, confetti. Is the things that I imagine that's happening.
Yes. And then they would shoot out. Now I'm picturing Mardi Gras, and they would shoot out mirrors and things for look at yourself, or shirts. And no matter what shirt you caught, it was your size somehow. It fit you beautifully.
It just fitted you perfectly. I love it.
What are you going to do to celebrate?
Funny you should ask that. I am celebrating this month by reconnecting to my city self after spending several months by the sea, and reconnecting with her, loving her. Also, I have been working on forgiveness recently. And it's been an interesting journey. It's forgiving myself, forgiving those who I believe have hurt me. I've been reading and listening to Sadhguru recently, and he has a lot of wisdom to share around forgiveness, which kind of intrigued me, and I kind of went down that rabbit hole. And by listening to him, reflecting, I've grown to understand that forgiveness is actually an act of self-love. It's more to do with you than anybody else, which I guess I knew, but I haven't really reflected or considered it. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm practicing forgiveness as an act of self-love this month. But more on this later, though. It's still cooking for me, and I want to do a deeper dive into this in an upcoming episode. What about you? How are you celebrating?
I'm intrigued. I've actually been refocusing on my body. I've been kind of making all of the appointments. I avoid going to all the appointments, but I made OBGYN and general practitioner and dentist, and I went to the nutritioner and the chiropractor.
What a team.
I know. I have my team of people. It takes a team to run this Jackie. You don't know. It takes a village to make this Jackie work. I've been running again after a few months hiatus. I gained weight over the winter, and I just don't feel connected to myself, to my body.
The person who doesn't gain weight during the winter, something's wrong with them.
Yeah. Well, because you get right. It's you need the extra warmth.
Yes. Yeah. I take that back. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're the person who's not gaining weight during winter, there's nothing wrong with you. I take it back. It's just most people gain weight during winter.
Did you know, I'm going to go on a quick aside, that I saw something on TikTok which made me think, as some TikToks make me think, is that if there were mermaids in real life, that mermaids would have weight on them, that mermaids would be thick, because if you look at animals like whales or manatee or other animals that are under the water, they have some thickness, so in order to keep themselves warm. And so these images that we have of these super thin mermaids, that probably would not be accurate if that was true.
That's interesting. In my head, mermaids are voluptuous, though. Yeah, you're right. The popular form of a mermaid is kind of skinny, but I just realized when you say that in my head, mermaids are voluptuous.
Yes.
They have hips and thick tails. So, yeah.
Yes. So even though I am feeling a little thicker than I normally am comfortable with, my partner loves every time I walk by her. She's like, look at those cakes. She's loving everything about what's happening right now. Everything that's growing out.
I love it.
no matter my body shape, it's about, I just want to feel more active. I want to feel like I'm eating good food. I've started running again after a few months. And so, yeah, I'm spending this month like focusing on my physical self. I spend a lot of time focusing on my mind and my soul. And so in January, I am focusing on my body.
Love it. So, this is a moment of confession here. While I love that we're celebrating self-love all month, I do actually think that self-love, I should say, the generic rhetoric around self-love is a bit bullshit. And I say that with a pinch of salt, just to like, get your attention. Self-love is bullshit. Just getting your attention here. So just bear with me. So here's the thing. For a lot of people, self-love is actually a huge feat. It's a big ask, especially for those of us who need to be reminded that self-love is a thing by having an entire month dedicated to it. It is a really high bar to clear. This indiscriminate, unconsidered prescription of self-love can really drive people away from self-love and leave them riddled in guilt or sense of failure. Definitely not what we want. So I hear it. Self-love month. Let's celebrate. High fives all around. And I would like to invite those who are listening who think like, oh, I must love myself. And then the idea of the fact that they must love themselves like cripples them. Please take a deep breath. It is okay. It is a huge feat. It's a big ask. Be gentle with yourself. My invitation to you is to explore, first and foremost, self-tolerance. Just get to a place where you can tolerate yourself, where you can just sit and be with yourself without necessarily having to love yourself or do anything like that. Just start with the fact that you can sit and be alone with yourself and you can tolerate yourself. Once taking your time doing that, next step is compassion, self-compassion. See if you can be compassionate towards yourself. And as a part of that, see if you can master some self-care routine where you can take care of the thing that you're supposed to love. And then I believe once you've done those things, self-love will come. But just throwing out this idea of self-love, that it is a thing that you must get to, I don't think it's as good as it sounds, to be honest.
Yes, here. Now I feel like in our self-love parade, there should be like a big float that's like self-love is bullshit. And there should be like music and people and like sequin, like dancing around it. Yes, I know. Because I put a lot of pressure on myself. First of all, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do everything, but including self-love. And so I appreciate that self-love, like everything else, can be done in moderation. Sometimes it's tolerate. Sometimes it's empathize with or care. Yes. Here. All the things. So in honor of self-love, our gift to you, dear audience, is we have decided to repost one of our favorite self-love episodes with one of our favorite educators, Stella Harris. If you recall, Stella is a certified intimacy educator and sex coach. She uses a variety of tools to guide and empower her clients. She also teaches everything from pleasure anatomy to communication skills to kink to BDSM. And Stella joined us to talk about masturbation as self-love and care in advance of a workshop that we hosted last summer. And though we originally recorded this back in May, the lessons that she shared have lasted and have stood the test of time. And so at the end of the episode, I will share a few updates based on how I have put Stella's masturbation tips into practice.
Let's dive in. Hi, Stella.
Hi. Thanks for having me again.
I'm excited that you were here for two reasons. One, May is Masturbation Month, which I just learned. So good for us for scheduling a masturbation session during Masturbation Month. But the second, I really have been thinking a lot about self-care and all the ways in which we can take care of ourselves during this time. It is 1 p.m. Eastern. I have just gotten out of bed in order to have this conversation. I've been sleeping for 2 days. And I think that every once in a while, my body forces myself. They're like, you're not going to take care of you. I'm going to do it for you. And I have really been crashing. And I think a piece of that is just, it's a continual reminders for the work that I do continue in my life to take care of myself. And I have gone through a masturbation kind of journey from growing up in a space that was very religious, and I had a lot of shame around it, to really embracing it and have seen that as a part of my self-care. So I would love to start there if you're comfortable with it. I just want to, when people hear about masturbation and self-care and self-love, I just want you to start from that place and define that for us. Tell us what that means for you.
Yeah, well, I think in general, we do kind of a terrible job at taking care of ourselves. I am in a similar place where, I end up crashing every few months because I've been pushing myself too hard. And in fact, before the sort of current lockdown happened, I was teetering on the edge of burnout. I was just doing way too much. And I think it has been, while the circumstances are not what anyone would hope for, I think people are having a chance to sort of slow down and think about their priorities a little bit, and thinking about, what do you actually need to do to take care of yourself now that it is even more essential than ever. And the touch piece is so huge. I mean, you are not alone in growing up with, shame or mixed messages around masturbation. That is one of the main things that comes up with any of the clients who come to see me. People have had very complicated relationships with their bodies, with masturbation. And that is so essential for, if you do want to have any kind of partnered play or partnered sex, you need to know what you like. You need to learn that on your own so you can talk to other people. But you also just need to have that relationship with your body, even if it's not going to be shared with anybody else. And I think especially right now, while a lot of people are suffering from a lack of touch and a lack of intimacy. And I think it's important to realize how much of that you can provide for yourself. Some of the same effects, some of the happy brain chemicals that we get from snuggling with other people, we can actually generate for ourselves. And our bodies actually don't always differentiate where a touch is coming from. We just don't usually spend a lot of times even, squeezing our own shoulders, stroking our own arms. We just don't think about giving ourselves that kind of loving care. And when it comes to masturbation, I think a lot of people treat it sort of utilitarian. Maybe they'll have, a quick orgasm before bed so they can get some sleep, something like that. It's not, but they're not romancing themselves. They're not lighting candles first. They're not taking time with it. It's just, almost like brushing their teeth.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of romancing yourself. Love thyself, romance thyself. I think it's definitely something to think about, because we don't think about it in that way. I think it's almost like having intimacy with yourself, like having an intimate moment generated by yourself with yourself. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what I'm getting from that. Like, sort of romance yourself is what it makes me think of.
Yeah, and just remembering all of those sensual pieces. I've been trying to remind myself, certainly not daily, but maybe weekly if I'm really on top of it. I just did this yesterday, lighting some candles, some incense, before I take a shower, because even that, it doesn't have to be sexual. It can also just be sensual, just remembering to enjoy that experience. Physical warmth can actually do some of the job of emotional warmth for us. So taking a hot bath or a hot shower, having a hot beverage, that can go a long way towards building some of that comfort that our body needs and that helps settle our mind. And doing that in sort of an intentional way where you're like, okay, I'm setting this candle, here on the counter. And that is also setting an intention, saying that while this is lit, it is creating a container for a certain kind of experience.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about that? I guess maybe the journey from shame to creating an experience. I mean, I love that language of, as opposed to seeing it as utilitarian and something like scratching an itch, which I think is probably how I would have described it for a long time, to really having an experience. I think for myself, and I actually shared in our last podcast episode, it naturally came up around when I was younger, again, grew up really religious, and actually didn't even know what the word masturbation was until probably high school. I just knew that I had essentially an itch that needed to be scratched. And I remember sharing that with my mom one day and saying, I have this tingling feeling. I was probably maybe like 10 years old, and, it makes me want to like touch it. And I remember she said to me, "That's disgusting." And that stuck with me. And I just knew that was wrong. And then certainly being in the church space, understood more and more. And so I really, for years through high school and college, struggled with not trying to stop myself from doing it. And then inevitably it would happen. And I would just feel such tremendous regret and remorse. And it wasn't until I was married with my ex-husband that when I was in a married space, it felt like, oh, okay, sexuality now, I've gotten some permission to be sexual, and I was able to explore it more. And throughout my journey into non-monogamy and into my own sexuality, I've been able to embrace masturbation as a way of taking care of myself, to the point now where I do more set and setting, and, like, okay, this is my time now to do this. And I'll tell my partner, as opposed to kind of quietly and secretly doing it next to them in bed after they fell asleep because it felt shameful. And so I've gone through this evolution, and I still think that there's a ways to go in terms of creating a real experience. And so I'm interested in the work that you've done for yourself and with your clients around that journey into creating experience.
Yeah, I mean, at first I will say I don't think there's anything wrong with, the utilitarian style. It can't be a multi-hour adventure every day. We just don't have that kind of time. So if it's, utilitarian part of the time, I think that that's fine. But I do think that creating the experience can be valuable. And, I'm definitely guilty of being kind of lazy about this a lot of the time, even for myself. And I have to remember sometimes to take better care of myself. When it comes to doing this for myself or sort of building this with clients, I frame it with clients often, depending where they're coming from and what they're open to. But when I have people who are open to a little bit of woo, I like to frame it as sort of building a personal ritual, and starting with sort of each of the elements or each of the senses. So thinking about something like lighting, does this feel like something you want to do at night and in the dark, or, maybe with a couple of candles? Or does it feel like something where you want to do it when the sun is streaming through the window, and maybe where you can lay an array of sunshine and sort of connect with, nature or the outdoors in that way? Do you want the window open so you're feeling a breeze, or do you want the curtains shut and like having a cozy space? So just sort of moving through one element at a time. What temperature do I want the room to be? What do I want the lighting to be? Do you want to be cuddled up under covers, or do you want to be completely exposed to the air? Do you want to see yourself, or do you want it to be a little more hidden? And thinking about the tools that you're going to use. Obviously as a sex educator, I am completely in favor of sex toys. They're tools. That's what we have them for. And also I think it's nice to explore your body with your hands sometimes. I think it can be nice to be able to do a combination. When people are using toys, I've worked with clients about treating those like ritual objects. It's especially nice with toys that, can be washed. So something that you can get wet. So, one of my favorite toys is made of stainless steel, so that, you can put that through a lot. So how would you treat that, as a ritual object? Do you store it in a particular way? Do you have a nice silk cloth that you wrap it in before it gets put away in the nightstand? What do you do for it when you pull it out? What about when you're going to wash it after use? Like, is that something that you could ritualize? The way that it's being washed. And that's another one when you think about, the elements. Well, water is one of the elements you can play with there. But if you wanted, you could, run it through incense or something like that, if you wanted to bring an element of air into it. And then again, the sensations that you bring into it, if you're, wrapping it in something special, putting it away somewhere special. And that can also help set that intention that this is something special, rather than something that gets, tumbled in with a bunch of other stuff in a junk drawer, or if it's sort of wrapped up and put away nicely.
Yeah, the precious toy that lives in your bedside table. For sure.
Yes, actually mine. So on the nightstand next to me, I have the Eva 2, which is a Dame product, and it comes like almost with its own little like habitat, its own little igloo, and it's plugged in, and it's like this light pink color, and at night it'll glow, or it'll kind of like pulsate glow, almost like play with me. I'm right here.
Like enticing you.
It is, and it's so like lovely, and just the texture of it is beautiful, and the shape of it, and it really does feel like that's where it lives and we communicate with each other. And when I take it out, it's special. It's a great product. And so it made me really think about that, exactly what you said. Oh, there is ritual around that for me. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. And that particular product is something that you kind of like. I like it. It looks nothing like nothing like anything that I've seen before. It has like a body and these two arms that come out down the side, right? That's the one that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I'm showing it out via our Zoom call. It is like a body with two almost extended arms, almost like a hug.
Exactly. And it kind of does this thing where it kind of fits inside you and then
wraps under your labia. So it's like hugging your vulva.
Yeah, exactly. And it just vibrates from that very particular place. And I think there's even ritual in the way that you kind of have to position it, because you kind of position it and it's hands-free. So you can put it in place, do its thing, and then you can feel your body while it's working. You don't have to hold on to it with one hand, which I like, because what Stella was saying, because a touch is a big part of it. And I think sometimes the part that I struggle with when I masturbate, honestly, first and foremost, I like my hand. Since we're getting into it, I'll share. I like my hand, and that's always my favorite. And then if I want something different, I'll go for toys. But if I'm if I want to hang out and spend time with myself, almost always with my hands. But the point is that you end up using one on to masturbate, and then you only have one left to feel around. With something like that, you can just use both hands to feel around, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. And you can use it with a partner, which is also really cool. And I think that's also what's interesting to me about talking about masturbations, is thinking about mutual masturbation or watching your partner. And you know, what's interesting to me is it takes some time to get to that place. You can have sex with someone for a long period of time and still they may not feel comfortable masturbating in front of you or you in front of them. And that I think is so fascinating, that there is still an element of privacy that relates to self-touch, that even sometimes there feels some caution or shyness around sharing that with a partner.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of clients that aren't ready to do that with somebody else, because that's often one of the first things I suggest is, show your partner how you like to be touched, touch yourself in front of them. And a lot of people aren't ready for that. Sometimes mutual masturbation is actually easier, because then at least each person is partially distracted versus completely putting on a show with, someone just staring at you and watching. And the other thing, you'd mentioned a little bit about, hiding under the covers while your partner is sleeping. That's something else. I have had clients. I've even had this asked when I'm speaking in college classes. I've had college students ask if I would consider masturbation cheating, which was such an interesting question, because it would not have occurred to me, because I think, your relationship with yourself is so essential. But I do hear this theme sometimes from students or clients, as though sexual energy is this finite resource, and it is somehow cheating your partner out of that if you, use it on yourself or waste it on yourself. So there we have this assumption, first, that it's a finite resource, and second, that it's something your partner then owns. So whether or not your partner owns it, I think that is problematic, but also I'm going to say everyone gets to make their own choices about how they regulate their sexuality. But at least the piece about it being a finite resource we know is not true. It's more like a muscle that we can exercise. So the more often we experience arousal, the more often we experience pleasure, the more able we are to do that. So masturbating more is actually more likely to increase our interest in partnered sex or in sexual activity with other people. So there's nothing that is being wasted. We're not going to run out of sexual energy if we use it up on ourselves. Sometimes there's a physical element, for somebody with a penis, there might be a refractory time. So if somebody masturbates and ejaculates, they might not be ready to go with a partner, in the next hour or two. For some folks, especially later in life, sometimes maybe not even that day. But that can also help us reframe what we mean by sexuality, because that's sort of assuming that either penetration or ejaculation or orgasm are the only kinds of sexual adventures with other people that matter. So the way we're talking about touch with ourselves, it can also be a reminder that kind of touch with other people is a completely valid sexual experience. It doesn't have to contain these particular elements.
It's interesting. I asked this question, similar question, when I'm talking about non-monogamy, actually mostly when I'm talking about monogamy. And I do ask the question just to get people to sort of think about it is, is masturbation cheating? Is sexting cheating? Is looking at somebody that you fancy with, a particular eye, objectifying them maybe, is that cheating? To get people to kind of realize even monogamy isn't as clear cut as you imagine, that the edges, there are these like parts that are open to interpretation, and coming to it from that place to design something is where I talk about. But the fact that there are definitely people who think masturbation, I work with people who think masturbation is cheating. It's interesting the way you put it. I think what I've heard more that it was not that it was cheating, but they were hurt that they were excluded from their partner's sexuality, not necessarily as an ownership thing, but they felt they was like they were left out. And I think that's another maybe reason why it's harder for people to sort of think about their partners masturbating sometimes.
Yeah, I've had that with when I'm working with half of a couple, heard sort of kind of jealousy. Like, I've had someone who said like, oh, I know when my partner like goes and takes a shower and masturbates, and they're jealous and they feel left out. And I think that can come from a few places. I think sometimes it does come from that fear of scarcity. I more often hear that when people aren't also getting their needs met. Like, I never hear that from people who are having tons of sex and are having as much sex as they would like. I hear that from people who want to be having more sex and then feel hurt or threatened in some way if their partner is masturbating when they're not having sex. And it is important to note that those things can come from different places. Mm-hmm. It fills different needs. Masturbation and partnered sex can fill different needs. And so again, it is not sort of, there's this like finite pie of sexuality and you're deciding where it goes. But people are often in the mood to masturbate when they're not in the mood for partnered sex, and vice versa. I also work with tons of people who really enjoy partnered sex and are kind of not that interested in masturbation. The stuff that they're getting from partnered sex is difficult for them to replicate. So they're not necessarily interchangeable in that way. And I think too, when people live together, that can be something tricky to negotiate, especially if people, they live together, they share a bedroom, especially if it's a small space. It can be tricky to negotiate time alone, especially right now. Folks aren't, going to work, they're not going out to see their friends, and you never get alone time. It can be really important to negotiate those boundaries, to explicitly say, like, you need to sit in the living room with headphones on and watch a movie because I'm going to go in the bedroom and masturbate for the next 2 hours. And that's a trade, that everybody gets that time. Like, okay, Tuesday night is my night, Thursday night is your night, and making sure that people still get that time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to all of that. I think interesting. So Jackie and I have this conversation every now and then. It comes up about her experience with masturbation and my experience with masturbation. And she's, she unfortunately comes from this place of trauma when it comes to masturbation, but has lived and has healed to tell the story, which I think is important. And I come from the other side of it all, where I just never got the memo about shame and sex. Like, I moved and then it got mailed and it got lost in the mail. So just somewhere along the line, I lucked out. I should say like internal shame. I understood that it's like, I'm not really supposed to talk to people about it and tell them because it was like out in the world, there was shame attached to it. But internally, I discovered my vagina around 4 and I was like, we're going to be BFFs forever. That's my experience. And when I hear you say, the sort of being ritualistic about it, feeling good about it, how it doesn't mimic like regular sex, or partnered sex, I should say. I completely agree with you. It's like time that I like to spend with myself. That is where I work things out. Sometimes it's where I like figure out, like connect with my own body and see what's going on. It could be that I'm, actively going a specific place and I'm using I'm just through this kind of personal intimacy. So I do find it to be like an important part of self-care and self-connection.
Yeah, I sort of figured out some of the ritual aspects when I was really young. I also was lucky to not get shamed early on from these things. I remember my mother, when I was pretty young, the only guidance I got was like, this is something we probably want to do in privacy, like shooing me out of the living room. Like, this is not the genital exploration room. Like, you should probably be in your bedroom for this. So I'm very grateful for that. And then it took me, of course, years longer to figure out orgasm, because generally children are exploring their genitals from day one, but orgasm is something that comes a lot later. And I remember when I was first had figured out orgasm, making it something that was almost ritualistic. I remember that every time I orgasmed, I would make a wish, and this is at like 13. Like I had my like early teen version of sex magic that I was making up for myself. And I didn't know anything about any of it. It just sort of felt like this sort of powerful thing. And like, oh, if I'm sending all this energy out into the world, I should do something with that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to start making wishes. I hadn't thought about that. Oh, I remember also figuring out orgasm earlier as well, like earlier than my peers, because I told them about it and nobody knew about it. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing that my body can do. And the other piece of it for me is we're saying also, not that you only get to know yourself, but something that I do is, this is also maybe like the educator in me. Like if I've just started having sex with somebody new, like a new play partner, and then you get that, the honeymoon period where you're like very aroused and thinking about them all the time. And then kind of, I've used time to masturbate to also figure out how I want to give them feedback about the how to fine tune what's happening between us, as like almost like a demonstrating on myself of like, oh, this, they do it this way. Oh, this is how I prefer it. And then be able to work it out like with myself, and then to be able to communicate that with a partner. So I think it's also a good place to like not only get to know yourself, but work out how you want to talk about and address some of the, fine tuning of your pleasure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Workshopping it on your own before you're bringing somebody else into it. And I tell this to people, when I'm teaching classes that are more anatomy based or technique based, I generally suggest to people, try this on yourself first. Like if you're looking for your G-spot, if you're looking for your prostate, figure it out with your own body first so you can give the other person guidance.
It's fascinating to listen to you both talk about it. This idea of orgasms as magic. I mean, when growing up, it was like orgasm was like relief followed by immediate shame and undoing that. Like it feels so wonderful to hear about stories where that wasn't the case. And it makes me think now even about, you were talking about some shyness with partners in talking about or masturbating in front of each other. And I realize that we use a lot of code words. I think that's more around, so, at some point I might say like, I'm going to go play as opposed to I'm going to, or, more recently with my partner, I'll talk about DJing because of the move of the fingers on the record. And so I'll say I was my own personal DJ right now. And so like, there are ways of talking about it that feel playful and transparent, but are not yet still for me as obvious as saying like, okay, I'm going to go hit one off or something like that. And so I wonder if that's not, I wonder rather if that's connected to kind of my story as it relates to masturbation in my journey, or do you see that often in the clients that you work with, that even when they talk about it, there's some euphemism that's associated with it, some language?
Oh, there's a lot of euphemism. I don't think anybody, I mean, in my office, almost nobody ever just like comes in and says, so when I masturbate, like this is not a word that anybody wants to say out loud.
It's not a very sexy word, yeah.
And I think it's been made ugly by experiences like you were talking about. It is either actively shamed or it's the butt of jokes, right? We treat masturbation like it is, the crummy consolation prize if you can't, get somebody to come home with you. And so I think we kind of do need new language around it. There's a choice between sort of reclaiming language or building something new. And I think that masturbation does have so many connotations now that turn people off, that talking about like self-love and self-care, I think that can be a valuable reframing and transformation. And I think it's valuable because, again, masturbation does, it implies genital touch to completion, to orgasm. And I think what I'm hoping to encourage people to do is more than just that. You could engage in self-love and care and never touch your genitals. Like if you are taking a bath with candles lit and, you're running body oil over every inch of your skin. Like that is incredibly sensual and is an act of self-love. But it doesn't have to incorporate your genitals, or if it does, it doesn't have to have orgasm as a goal. Because I think part of what I would love for people to do is explore the sort of pleasure potential of every part of their body. We think of these very limited erogenous zones, but there isn't a single part of your body that can't be touched in a way that feels good. So finding all of that, again, can be something that you spend more time on or ritualize or turn into a process. But we need more expansive language for that, because it's not, like you said, just sort of like, oh, I'm just going to go like bang one off, that, which again is fine. Sometimes it is scratching an itch, and that's fine. I mean, goodness knows I usually want to have an orgasm before I go to sleep at night. And it's like 3 minutes with my Hitachi. Like it is not, rainbows and sparkles every time I want to get off. Like
it's true. Sometimes just for a little hit of energy or something. Or
yeah, sometimes it is like I brush my teeth, I have an orgasm, I go to sleep. Like, and that's also fine. Like I'm not saying I have hours every day to dedicate to this practice.
As I'm listening to you talk about it just made me realize that we say pretty much all this stuff about sex also.
Mm-hmm.
Like having a quickie on your kitchen counter, or having an all night, all morning, experience, immersive experience. We just say make sure that you're getting all of that, and that it's working for you. I think it's a similar experience to masturbation. It's okay to like knock one out. It's funny how we all say it differently. I definitely have some like the British words I use as well. Like wank. You guys don't. Do you say wank?
No.
Yeah. I don't say it personally, but I do miss that word. Having a wank.
Really? It feels phallic.
It is probably phallic. Yeah, having a wank. But I think it's also like reclaimed for because it's like, why does it have to be phallic? So it has been reclaimed, but it's kind of again also I think is an ugly word for a beautiful experience.
Can we talk about that for a minute? A little bit of the beautiful experience versus the ugly experience, and I'm interested into whether or not you believe that masturbation at any point could be unhealthy. So let me ask that question first, because there's a specific scenario that I have been through that I'm also curious about. But I'm wondering for you if it ever is unhealthy.
I think any behavior can at some point become unhealthy. Like there's anything can become compulsive in some way. Generally if people come to me and they are worried, oh, I'm masturbating too much, I ask, what does that mean? Like, is it getting in the way of your day? Are you not able to make it through a work day because you're taking multiple breaks to masturbate? Or are you masturbating to the point that, is your skin raw? Are you harmed in some way? And, 99% of the time they think it is too much or problematic because of cultural messages. And it is pretty darn rare that it is actually disrupting somebody's life. But anything, we can use any behavior in a way that becomes an unhealthy coping mechanism. And masturbation is just one of those behaviors that can be on that list. I just think that we treat it differently than all of the other behaviors because we treat sex differently.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you talk about it then that way in terms of coping. I think when I wondered to myself whether or not masturbation was healthy for me was when my nesting partner started another relationship, and it felt at the time really threatening and uncomfortable for me. And anytime I would think about their relationship, I would immediately feel triggered and feel anxious. And what I started to notice, and this took me time, is I would also then get really highly aroused. And in my mind, I translated that as like, oh, the idea of, my partner with someone else is sexy and does turn me on. And I wanted to lean into that. But then at some point, I think I started to feel clearer to me that it was almost my body's way of protecting me, of like, no, don't be sad or scared. Look over here. Like this is fun. Let's concentrate on this. And I actually realized it was less about me being aroused potentially about their connection and more about my body trying to distract me or heal me from something that felt like it was anxiety. And there was a moment where I was like, well, good for you, body. Like, look at you trying to take care of me. And then I also wondered, oh, was that unhealthy? Is should I really be able to sit in this discomfort without distracting myself, almost as I would with food or watching something, disconnecting in some way? Was this an experience of disconnection rather than an experience of connection, which is what I thought that it was? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, I'm still playing with that in my own head around what that has meant for me.
I mean, it's important to be able to, sit with your feelings and feel your feelings. And also there's a point at which that can be too acute. It can be too much to manage at once. And masturbation and orgasm is a great way to manage anxiety. I mean, it does in fact reduce stress and reduce anxiety. And I wonder if, every time your partner was on a date and you felt a little anxious, like if you went on a jog to clear your mind, like, would you be asking if it was a problem that you went for a jog every time they had a date?
Fair point.
I don't know. Maybe.
You're right. I think because it's related to sexuality is what made that feel different for me. I think you're right about that.
And we do both, right? Like getting your heart rate up, they actually do very similar things. So in Emily Nagoski's book, Burnout, she talks about needing to complete the stress cycle. So when we are activated, when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling anxious, that system was sort of built when we dealt with threats that would then go away. I think her example is like you get chased by a lion and then either you're eaten or you get back to the village and you're safe and you can like relax and celebrate. And in the modern day, we don't get to the other side of that, right? If your partner is dating somebody, that never goes away. It ebbs and flows if they're with the other person or if they're with you, or if you have work anxiety. Like there is never we're on the other side of it and we get to celebrate. And so we can sort of trick our body into that same, okay, we've gotten to the other side of it by anything that increases our heart rate for a period of time and then it decreases. So exercise does that really well. Something counts as sort of cardio if your heart rate is up for 20 minutes. So if you go for a jog, if you're on a treadmill, or again, if you're masturbating or having sex vigorously enough that your heart rate is up for 20 minutes, and then your heart rate goes down afterwards, your body is able to have that experience of, heightened arousal and then, literally sort of the climax and the denouement after that lets your body see everything is okay now. So it's actually taking your body through this really important process.
That's incredible. I am a runner, so that is helpful. It cleared up a lot for me as to why I feel the need to run often. Yeah, that's really helpful.
It's also the same effect of like, if you really want to relax a muscle, you can squeeze it really hard first and then you let it go and it relaxes even more. And then the contrast gives you a relief. It's the same kind of idea. You kind of, create tension and then release it. So everything else releases around it as well. So I think it's definitely a good tool.
And anxiety and arousal are just about the same thing in the brain. I mean, there's a reason that anti-anxiety meds often kill people's desire. Because your brain being aroused is your brain being aroused. It doesn't differentiate between anxiety and sexual turn on. I mean, the word, I think the Latin word for hormone basically translates to arousal. Like anything that activates systems in the body, it all sort of is lumped together. So anxiety and arousal are very close neighbors. And so I think that's also sort of another reason that could be tied together when you're feeling anxious about this situation. And I think being able to pivot that into arousal, both something that you can manage in a positive way, but also so you can sort of go through that arc. That's definitely something that I've experienced in my non-monogamy. A partner gets home from a date and I'm kind of jealous and they're telling me about it. And if possible, I like to sort of sexualize that together. I've had sex with a partner while they tell me about the sex they had with the other person. And it's sort of using that jealousy, anxiety to heighten arousal and sort of choosing to use that the way that I want to, choose to channel that energy in a way that is useful to me.
Absolutely. I mean, it totally makes sense. It's essentially the difference between your nervous system your nervous system's experience, which in arousal, like you said, is arousal, period. Like, and it's the story comes from your sort of frontal cortex is when you're like either using it to release anxiety or using it to get sexually turned on. It's whatever story that you're applying to a particular state of your nervous system. It's just that we have stories and then stigmas attached to those stories if you sexualize it, versus if you use it, whether you're just as anxiety or whether you use it for to drive other things. So yeah, it's interesting. So next time you masturbate, Jackie, just pretend you're jogging. Is what I'm getting out of the story. In conclusion,
running and masturbation are both. No, honestly though, I really do appreciate you sharing that. I think one of the things that Effy and I believe are really important in our work is to give people a sense of permission and inspiration, and you only hear that by hearing alternative perspectives and stories. And I think I've had a particular narrative in my mind around this, certainly rooted in my experience of shame growing up. And I think hearing you describe it in that way, even physiologically, to say, we have to go through this arc, gives me more permission and inspiration to lean into that, as opposed to feeling like that was something that was wrong. And I think, I've been in this work with Effy for, 2 years now, and certainly my own journey in sexuality and relationship. And I'm still finding myself healing from things and getting over things and relearning things. And so I love the fact, I think, that this is a continual journey of becoming more comfortable with myself.
I mean, imagine how long did it take you to learn those negative stories? I mean, that sounds like that was
it's true.
A decade, 2 decades,
25 years at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So why wouldn't it be a journey in reverse of another 25 years to, come completely to the other side of that, come to completely a place of where it is, magic and freedom. And, you're not going to unlearn 25 years of messages in 2 years. I mean, it sounds like you've come an incredibly far way, but if you think about that, how far you've come already, imagine where you could be in another 2 years, 4 years, 10 years.
Yeah. I like it. I'll have to report back 2 years from now, me.
I was going to say, I'm excited for this journey.
So tell me a little bit about, some, particularly now we've referenced this, we're in social distancing time and people are either separated with or away from partners. And so I'm wondering if there are any particular tips or things that you have been sharing with folks. I think you've shared with us a number of them already today, but particularly during this time, either people who are on their own or people who are separated from partners, or maybe are not partnered, or folks who are with partners, just ways in which they can continue to think about masturbation during this time of social distancing and isolation.
I mean, I think the number one thing is remembering how much comfort you can provide to yourself. If you are social distancing such that you're living either entirely alone or you're living, not with people you exchange touch with, remembering how much of that need you can in fact meet for yourself, and doing your best to get, as many of those needs met on your own as you can. I think, again, it's not under circumstances I would have chosen, but I think in some ways it can be valuable that people can actually hopefully come out of this realizing how much of these needs they can meet for themselves. And when we're back to, dating and hookups and all of that, maybe there are times where you would, go home with somebody kind of like, I guess so, just because you want to, again, scratch that itch or get that need met. And now maybe folks will realize, like, actually, I can do a pretty darn good job by myself, and sort of can be more choosy about how needs are met. So I think it's important to realize how much of that you can do for yourself, and finding ways to, again, if you are missing somebody who is elsewhere, deciding whether or not that is something that you want to share. Like we talked a little bit about last time, do you want there to be, sexting or phone sex or video sex, or even just reporting back, if all of those things either feel technically challenging or just like too much multitasking, the next day you can tell someone like, hey, I, did this and that while I was thinking about you, or giving or exchanging assignments, but finding ways to share those moments with somebody if that feels like something that would be helpful and would build intimacy.
Absolutely. Great tips. Great tips as usual. And the way that we don't think about, one of the things like Jackie say, we do this podcast, and the work that we do is think about things like this. things like masturbation, how we can take care of ourselves, how do we make it happen in a sort of calm, no judgment space, and really think of like practical tips of like how we're going to make this happen. And I love that when we leave people with some tips they can take away and enjoy. So Stella, before we wrap up, I want to ask you a broad question of what are you curious about these days?
I mean, I think I am sort of moving into figuring out more of some of the spiritual spaces, some of the spiritual uses of pleasure, whether it includes orgasm or not. I often end up writing classes about things that I want to learn. I've sort of learned that like the next step for anything I want to learn is like, okay, well, I'm going to have to teach about it. I've gotten as much as I can get from books and from just receiving information. And now I need to play with that information with other people. And I wrote an article about masturbation as ritual a couple of years ago that's on my website, and have been sort of, playing with that idea and thinking about it for a while, but moving more into sort of workshopping that with other folks is something I'm very interested in. I have a whole stack of books on my nightstand right now, actually, about sex magic. So that's a big curiosity of mine right now.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be your next event with us. You're going to be joining us in our virtual Curiosity Salon on Wednesday, May 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you're going to facilitate a workshop on masturbation as self-love and care.
And I will be sneaking a few of my little woo interests in there, but a lot of it will be practical as well.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What a great episode from the archives. I love that we have archives now and we have great episodes in our archives. So what a great episode from our archives. Listen, I know I said at the beginning that I don't buy into this generic self-love rhetoric, and I don't. But I can definitely get behind masturbation as self-love and self-care for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you both talking about like laying in the sunlight and like just like creating this like little nest of lights and love for yourself. I was like, ooh, that was not my experience in the past. So I love that. And I should say, let me give you a little update. So since we recorded that episode a few months ago, I have put Stella's advice into practice with some wonderfully orgasmic results. I have upped my masturbation game. I have much more quality masturbation time. Just, because I know the listeners were worried. And so I want to report back. It's okay, everyone. It's okay.
Masturbation is back in the game.
I know that we talked in the beginning that I have a whole team of people. And so I know that the foxes are part of my team. Not to worry, everyone. My masturbation quality time has improved. And I created my own sex nest. I did a whole bedroom makeover.
You can see it all on Facebook, on our Facebook group. And it is hot.
Yeah, I actually went to the Facebook Foxes and I asked for advice, and people weighed in. People were like, get these scented candles and get this diffuser and get these lights and all these things. And then I was snapping little pictures along the way. And so there's fabrics now and colors, and they're some little quality towels by the bed, and they're just and little fun toys accessible. It was a beautiful exercise, and it took me a few months to do it because it took a little bit over time. But if you want to see pictures, go to our Facebook group and just search for Sex Nest, and all those pictures will come up. But so those were the two things. It made an impression on me, that particular episode. So now it's self-love month all the time.
All day, every day, self-love month.
It was good stuff. So if you're interested in what Stella had to say and you want to follow her on Instagram, then you can find her at Stella Harris Erotica. You can follow her at Twitter at Stella Erotica, or you can visit her website at stellaharris.net. While you're on there, might as well check us out. You can go to We Are Curious Foxes, Instagram. You can go to Facebook. We have a Facebook page and a Facebook group because we like options. And so if you join the Facebook group and you answer 3 questions, we're going to let you in, and then you can be a part of the conversation and you can find those pictures from my bedroom. You should find us on Patreon because Stella Harris, that workshop that she did back this summer, it's on Patreon. I don't know if you knew that, but all of the videos, we recorded all of the workshops that we did, both live and on Zoom. And I'm whispering into the mic now. Stella Harris did a workshop on the vulva live and in person.
Wow.
And she had a live demo. I'm just letting there be silence for people to take that in. And she demonstrated on a live human person all the magic that can happen in the vulva area. And that video is on Patreon as well. So if you are not a Patreon member, you should be going on to Patreon, not only because our videos are there from all of our in-person and our Zoom workshops, but also you get bonus features like bonus episodes, bonus content, events just for patrons, and a bunch of cool other things. So go on to Patreon while you are there and on your phone and looking for all the We Are Curious Foxes stuff. You should be liking and rating and sharing this podcast. If it made you laugh, if we made you think, if we helped you expand what is possible for you, then we would love for you to share this content with other folks. The way in which people generally find Curious Fox is through recommendations. And so we would love for you to be one of those recommendations. And if you have recommendations for us on what it is that we can talk about on the podcast, then you can reach out to us by emailing us at listening@wearecuriousfoxes. You can either send us a word email, or if you want to be extra creative, send us a voice memo. And if you're into that kind of thing and letting us hear the sound of your voice, you can give us a call at 201-870-0063. Every once in a while, we do listener question episodes. And so we would love to have your question on our next show.
This episode is produced and edited by the ever-encouraging and bright Nina Pollock. Our intro music is composed by Zaif Saha. We are so grateful for their work. And we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.